Hey everybody, welcome back to some more remote learning with Mr. Delcourt. We're shifting gears today. We're moving on from those deciduous trees, those broadleaf trees, and we're going to look at our final 6 species of trees to learn here. We'll be up to 26 species of trees when we're done with these guys, and these are our conifers or conifers. They are coniferous trees. They are what many people would often refer to as our evergreen trees. So up until now, we've learned about those trees that grow a new set of leaves every year, and we're moving on today to talk about evergreens or conifers, trees that reproduce using cones, and they do not shed their leaves every year. So someday you take yourself a college botany class, you'll learn all about the differences between gymnosperms and angiosperms. We're going to keep it simple here, and we'll just know that evergreens are gymnosperms, and that means that they reproduce using naked seeds, and they're typically found in cones, hence the name conifers or coniferous trees. These are cone-bearing trees. You'll hear Mainers call them evergreens because they stay green year-round. You'll also hear people call it softwood. A lot of the people I would hunt with growing up would refer to like a patch of evergreen or coniferous trees as just softwoods. And that's because their woods are technically, you're usually a little bit softer than our deciduous trees, but we learned back before we left class that even our deciduous trees, which are often called hardwoods, aren't always hard. And the opposite is true here. Our softwoods aren't always soft, although as a rule, most of them have pretty soft, light wood. These guys have leaves just like any other tree, except their leaves are needle-shaped. It's important to realize that needles are leaves. They're just a different kind of leaf. We're going to use those needles to identify a lot of these trees. And all of these trees in Maine retain these leaves except one. So we have one species of conifer that is actually deciduous, which is kind of backwards and weird. And that's the tamarack, also called the larch tree, which I'm not going to make you guys learn. It's not super common around here. The only place you're going to find that tamarack around here is probably out, I know they're out there in the Saco Bog Boardwalk, or what people call the heath. And I might take a walk out there and do some filming later on this year, and we'll take a look at those tamaracks that are out there growing in the heath. But a really rare tree here in southern Maine, so we won't focus on it too much. When we talk about evergreens, we're thinking about trees that are green year-round. We have 16 native species of conifers here in Maine. We're going to focus on kind of the 6 most common that you're going to find around here in York and Cumberland County, because I want you guys to be pros as you walk around identifying the trees in the woods around here. So one of the interesting parts about our conifers is that these guys are really evolved to live in really harsh winter cold climates. They really thrive the further north you go. And there's a certain point when we get well up into Canada where you start to lose deciduous trees. There really aren't any left, and all you're going to find are conifers. And the biome that we find that's dominated by conifers is the taiga, which is found north of us in Canada. Here in Maine, we're really at this kind of mixing ground between our like temperate deciduous forests and our coniferous taiga. We have like a pretty solid mix of both. But the further north you go in Maine, you're going to find drastic increases in the amount of conifers on the landscape. And if anybody here has ever been up north, you know for sure that the woods are full of these evergreen trees. There's tons of spruce and fir and pine the further north you go. So some of those winter adaptations of these trees include sap that is really highly concentrated. Most people would call it pitch because it's so thick and sticky, and that helps to prevent it from freezing during the really cold winter months. And their leaves are waxy and retain water. That needle shape helps them shed snow. So by having that highly concentrated pitch and needle-shaped leaves, they can retain their leaves all winter and not run the risk of freezing and killing the tissues. And those needles help to shed the snow so they don't lose branches and things like that. And then if we look at the conical shape of these trees, the ones in the images there are perfect cone-shaped. Those look like fir trees to me, and that we think is an adaptation that helps to shed snow as well. Instead of having all your weight way up there at the tippy top, why not have the majority of your weight down low so that when you do get piled up with snow, you're not running into the risk of tipping over. So let's jump right in and let's talk about the 6 conifers we need to know for this class. This one is maybe the most common. It's our state tree, the eastern white pine, the Pinus strobus. And super easy to remember that Pinus makes me think of pine, and strobus is for white. And it's Maine's state tree. It is our largest conifer. It's the largest conifer on the East Coast. These guys get huge. They can be, a couple 100 feet tall, and they were once a really, really important tree to our economy, still are to this day, but these have been an important tree throughout our history. To identify an eastern white pine, I'm looking for needles that are 3 to 5 inches long, flexible, and they're always found in clusters of 5. And the easy way I remember that is WHITE has 5 letters, white pine, 5 letters in white, 5 needles in the cluster. And these needles are soft and flexible to the touch, a little pointy. I always tell people it reminds me of the old koosh balls. Have you ever seen a koosh ball? Those things they're like made of all the rubber bands, and they're real squishy feeling. Eastern white pine needles feel a lot like a koosh ball. The wood is often used in construction, woodworking, for pulp to make paper. It's got tons of uses. Eastern white pine, super important tree for our economy to this day. Highly valuable lumber and eastern white pine all around the state. So eastern white pine, our first one to know, our state tree. Got to know the old eastern white pine, Pinus strobus. Now here we go, balsam fir, Abies balsamia. This is the most common tree we use for a Christmas tree around here in the East. And a lot of people would look at this tree and say, hey, look, that's a Christmas tree, when in reality they're looking at a balsam fir, Abies balsamia. This is, interestingly enough, Maine's most common tree species by number. So if you counted up the number of stems growing across the state of Maine, there are more balsam fir than anything else. And you wouldn't know that looking around the woods here in southern Maine, but let me tell you, you get up north and everywhere you look in all directions, you'll see balsam fir. And it's really not a surprise then that this is Maine's most numerous tree. These guys are everywhere. To identify balsam fir, I'm looking at leaves that are 1 inch in length. They're kind of flat, they're dark green. They come off the twig in kind of a flat pattern, which is going to be different than some of the other trees we're going to see here in a little bit. And like most fir trees, their cones grow directly from the trunk up near the top, and they disintegrate when they mature. So those cones literally just fall apart at the end of the year off the top of the tree. That'll be a little different in some of our other ones. Let's go take a look at our Forest Trees in Maine book here. There's our eastern white pine, that classic cone I bet a lot of us have found in our yards raking. But let's go find our Abies balsamia here. Let's see, we're looking through all of our pines, spruce. Here we go. There we go. There's our balsam fir. And again, if we look here, we see really flat needles coming off the twig in a flat pattern. And we'll take a little more of a look at that when we get out into the woods here. I'm hoping to do a little bit of a conifer tree walk here in the next few days. There's those cones growing straight off the tree. And really nice smooth bark, but it's got those pockets of pitch underneath. You can see those bubbles that would be loaded with pitch if you were to break those. And anytime, if anybody here has ever lugged a Christmas tree in their house, they may have found out the hard way that these trees can be pretty covered in pitch. And if you look closely, look at that. The majority of York County really shows no balsam fir as an area of occurrence. I can tell you from experience, it's out there, and I'll show you some in York County here in the next couple days when I get out and do a tree walk. But if you look at the majority of the state, it is found statewide, super common tree, the balsam fir. One of the things that jumps out at me when I identify balsam fir too is its arrangement. Look at how perfectly opposite that arrangement is. Those little twigs growing opposite of each other the whole way out. That's going to be important when we compare it to another tree here in a little bit. Let's move on to conifer number 3. This is red spruce, Picea rubens. This has shorter needles, about 1/2 inch long. They're pointed, they're stiff, and they are prickly to the touch. Spruce needles hurt. If you ever walked through the woods and grabbed a hold of a spruce branch, thinking it might have been a balsam fir, you will quickly go, ooh, ouch, and feel the prickle of those needles. Especially red spruce is very prickly feeling. I always remember it by telling people spiky spruce. They kind of go together. Spruce is spiky to the touch, and it is not fun to grab a hold of. We use spruce a lot for 2x4s and building lumber and also making paper, pulp for paper. And it is super common up north as well. But here's the difference with spruce. Unlike fir, whose cones like to grow right from the trunk and then fall apart at the end of the year, spruce's cones grow out on the branch and they'll hang on, and you'll see, your classic kind of cones hanging from the branches. That's one difference. The bark is also a little bit different looking here. And if we open up, I bet we can go back and find our spruce tree. Blue spruce. Let's find red spruce here. There's our red spruce. If we look at the needles on red spruce, unlike fir, which is flat, if you look at the needles on red spruce, they actually go all the way around the twig, and that's a really important detail to look for that I'll point out to you over and over again as I find these in the woods. Those needles go all the way around the twig. They're not in a flat pattern at all, and if you were to grab a hold of that branch, you would find out the hard way, it's pretty prickly. And if we look at the bark on a spruce tree, where that fir bark was much smoother with those little pockets of pitch, spruce bark is known for being very kind of rough looking like that. And if you look again, there's those cones growing off the branch. But if we look, we can see statewide distribution, maybe missing down there in real southern York County. We have it in the woods around here a little bit, but it's not a common tree here in York County. But again, you get up north, and there is spruce everywhere up there. So back to our notability we go. We got red spruce, Picea rubens, needles going all the way around the tree. That's spiky spruce. And we have several other species of spruce in Maine, but red spruce is by far the most common. And if you find a spruce tree growing in the Maine woods on, any kind of upland, not wet soil, and you point and say, hey, that's a red spruce, you're probably going to be right. It's that common, by far the most common. So here we go. Here's a really unique conifer that we have around. This is northern white cedar, Thuja occidentalis. And northern white cedar is a really interesting tree in that instead of having needles like a lot of our other conifers, it has this really scaly looking leaf that it retains year round. And it's unlike any other, on the quiz it's an easy one because it looks so unique. It grows in all kinds of habitats, but it loves to grow in wet, swampy ground. And up north you'll find a lot of cedar growing down in, what people would call a cedar swamp. It's a wet, swampy area dominated by white cedar. And it's also planted all over the place as an ornamental tree. I'm looking out my window right now at my neighbors' houses, which have northern white spruce planted as little shrubs in their yard. We've taken this tree and kind of domesticated it into a cultivar that is often referred to as an arborvitae, and that's just northern white spruce that's been kind of domesticated and trained to grow in these like ornamental shapes. And I'll show you some arborvitaes around town as we get out and about here. And it's all northern white spruce. It's just kind of like a domestic version of northern white spruce. And the lumber is weather and insect resistant. So we use it in shingles, northern white cedar. We use it in cedar shakes shingles, fence posts, and your mother or grandmother may even have a hope chest at your house that's made to hold old blankets and things that they wanted to really keep safe. Because cedar repels insects, people would keep their old wool clothes in a hope chest, and that would prevent moths from getting in there and chewing on their sweaters and things like that. Not a common problem these days, but you may have a cedar hope chest in your house. Ask your parents about it. So there's northern white cedar. If we go back and look at our forest trees in Maine book, let's see if we can find cedar here. Where are we? I bet it's back this way. Oh, here we go. So there's our northern white cedar. There's that scaly leaf I was telling you about, green year round. The bark is really unique, kind of pale gray with these little strips that hang down off of it. But yeah, just cedar is a really unique tree, unique to the touch, very leathery feeling, feels like lizard skin a little bit. Here's a really interesting one that I'm not going to make you learn, but this is Atlantic white cedar. You can see it's got that similar scaly leaf. This one is found in only a couple of sites, in the entire state, one of which is the Saco Heath. And you can walk around in the heath and find this very rare tree, the Atlantic white cedar, which is actually pretty rare around the state. And we have a red cedar as well, eastern red cedar, not as common around, but it is around here and there. What we're gonna find commonly up north is that northern white cedar all over the place. Let's continue on. A couple more here. We've got eastern hemlock, Tsuga canadensis. This thing is everywhere around southern Maine and statewide. Tons of it right behind TA. It's easily confused with balsam fir. If you look at that, people may think, wow, balsam fir, look at those flat green needles. But these needles are much shorter. They're like a 1/4 inch in length compared to that 1 inch long fir needle. And if you look at the arrangement of that twig, notice how those little branches are going in all different directions, and there's no real rhyme or reason compared to balsam fir, which tends to grow in these perfectly paired little branches. So this is not opposite in any way compared to balsam fir, which is another dead giveaway that we're looking at eastern hemlock. So those really short, flat needles with the needles are out on a little petiole too. So if you look close, those needles are on this little tiny stalk, which is different than fir. And yeah, so let's take a look at eastern hemlock. I'll show you a ton of these in the woods as I get out walking around next time. I think it was back this way. Let's see if we can find it. Ooh, there it was right there. So eastern hemlock, again, if we look at its arrangement, notice that it's not perfectly opposite like balsam fir was. Those needles are really flat and they're on kind of almost a miniature little petiole if you look really close. Yeah, we find this tree everywhere. I bet some of you have even found cones like that laying on the ground, and it's a pretty common tree in the Maine woods. Used to be a pretty important lumber tree for building barns and things, but nowadays really not a whole lot of use for hemlock with our lumber industry, which is kind of a bummer. And then our last one here, the last one that it wouldn't be right if I didn't do with you, is red pine. Red pine, Pinus resinosa, is similar to white pine, but really distinctly unique in that it's got needles in clusters of 2 rather than 5 of the white pine, and the needles are much longer and they're much more brittle. You can take a white pine needle and flex that thing between your fingers, and it's really flexy and soft feeling. A red pine needle, if you flex that between your fingers, will break. And they make like a really nice toothpick almost. They're the diameter of a toothpick. They're really big and brittle. But I tend to like a red pine needle for a toothpick as I'm walking around the woods. They're found statewide. Again, those really long, brittle needles in clusters of 2. And their bark does have kind of a reddish tint to it. If I come back here, let's look for red pine. Let's go back. Let's see, we're in the spruces. Now we're in the pines. There's our red pine right there. That picture doesn't really do it justice. We're going to look for needles in clusters of 2 on the red pine. There's a good shot of, those needles are over 6 inches long, and that really kind of red flaky bark on the red pine, it tends to hold those cones for a long time. Right over there in front of the dorms on campus by the stadium, there's a few red pines planted that we usually take a walk over to look at. They're cultivars, but they're a good demonstration of what red pine needles should look like. I'll try to find some of these in the woods around here when I do my walk. I'm trying to plan a location that's going to have all 6 of these species, which can be hard in southern Maine to find all 6 of these. I may have to drive around a little bit to get that video done. So the other pine member that you're going to find around here in southern Maine that it wouldn't be right if I didn't show you is pitch pine right here. I see a lot of pitch pine out in Dayton, along Route 5 in Dayton, kind of by Dayton Sand and Gravel out towards that way. Down Gould Road, there's pitch pine along the side of the road. It loves to grow on sandy, well-drained soils, and it has needles in clusters of 3, which is the only one in Maine with needles in clusters of 3, and you'll see it growing along the side of the road. You may mistake it for red pine when you first look at it, but the needles are shorter. There you see that cluster of 3, and the cones have these really sharp spikes on them. This loves to grow down along the beach too. Ferry Beach State Park, a lot of pitch pine growing in the sand right along the beach there, and if you look, kind of a southern Maine only pine tree. Wouldn't be right to show you that one, to talk about conifers and not show you that one, but not one that I necessarily need you to know. Oh, I got all geeked up last year in Jackman finding this one with my family. This is jack pine. These tiny little short needles in clusters of 2. That was really exciting to see a tree that we don't have at all around here, and to find those growing up there while picking blueberries with my family was wicked exciting. You can imagine how geeked up I got to find a new species of pine tree walking around the Maine woods. So 6 species of conifers to know. We're going to practice them a bunch. I'm going to do a tree walk. We'll go over all this stuff again. Again, to just quickly go through them, we've got eastern white pine, Pinus strobus, needles in clusters of 5, flexible, very common statewide. Balsam fir, pretty much perfectly oppositely arranged, those 1-inch flat needles. It's that Christmas tree that we like to use. Red spruce, spiky spruce, those short spiky needles that go all the way around the twig, 360 degrees. It's the most common spruce tree. The northern white cedar, Thuja occidentalis, is that classic common cedar. We see it grown in hedgerows a lot around here as arborvitaes. It's got that flat kind of leathery feeling leaf. Eastern hemlock has that kind of random arrangement, really short, flat needles, forms really dense, thick canopies in the woods. And we'll see that quite a bit around here in southern Maine. And then our last one, red pine, Pinus resinosa, has got those needles in clusters of 2, long, really brittle needles that kind of snap if you try to flex in between your finger. And they retain those cones on their trunk for a long time if you look up in the canopy. So a lot of different stuff to look for. I'm hoping to show you all these things by getting out in the woods here in the next few days and making a nice video. So stay tuned. I really appreciate you guys' hard work. You're going to want to go ahead and pick one of those 6 species to do a profile on here. It might take you 5-10 minutes to get that profile done, and you'll be done for the day. I appreciate your hard work. Don't be afraid to reach out via email.